Hey everybody, it's Rob. I'm back. We're doing another Offsec Proving Grounds practice machine. This time we're doing a machine called Flink. It is a Linux box rated as intermediate, and it was pretty tough. You can see here it took me about an hour and 41 minutes to get through. And I would have to say I enjoyed it, but it was also a struggle because I hate Java. No offense to all the Java people out there, but it's just not something that I enjoy. But I did learn a lot, and this is a brand new machine. I think it was just released on December 3rd, so I don't think there are any walkthroughs, so you're welcome. So without further ado, you can see I am on Offsec's VPN, and I do have Flink spun up, and here's the IP address. The first thing that I did was I ran an Nmap scan, service version detection, T4 aggressive on all ports. And what came back was 22 and 8081. Now 8081, it's kind of one of those weird ones where Nmap throws back an unrecognized service despite returning data. So what we did was we went to 8081, and it's this Apache Flink, which I knew nothing about. So I did some research, and it looks like it's some kind of job manager for deploying Java applications. Now, I could be all washed up about that. I don't know. I just did some minimal research on it. There's not a whole lot of options here, but anytime you can run jobs or of any kind, there's always the potential to be able to exploit the machine and potentially get a reverse shell. So as I poked around in here, it looks like you can submit a new job, and it took me a while to figure out how to do that, in fact, because I'd submit the job and nothing would happen. There's some parameters that you have to basically give it, which is the entry class. So for the non-Java people out there, when you run a Java program, you basically have to kind of tell it where it starts. Usually it's, the main class of the Java program. So what I thought I could do was to create a job that generated a reverse shell. So what I did was I went to the online reverse shell generator, and what I did was I looked for Java ones. And the other thing that I figured out here was that you can't just submit a Java program. It has to be a jar file, which is, I guess, more in line with a Java executable. So basically, I took this Java 3 one, and I used that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open up Mousepad, and I'm just going to copy the script that I used, and I'm going to paste it here. And this is purely the Java 3 from the online reverse shell generator. And we're going to save it, and I'm going to save it in my downloads folder, and I'm going to call it, what do we want to call it? I think I called it shell.java. All right, so obviously when you do the online reverse shell generator, you need to give it the IP address and then the port, and everything else should be just fine, okay? Now, the first thing that I ran into is I couldn't remember how to even compile a Java program, but they give you some pretty good instructions right here in Stack Overflow if you search for that. How do I make a jar from a Java file? The first thing that you're going to need to do is, I believe Kali comes with Java CC. I couldn't get it working with that. You're going to need to install Java. And if you need to do that, I'm not going to do it, but I will show you the command that you need to install Java with. I'm going to open a terminal and paste it right here. It's sudo apt install default JDK. Okay? When you install that, it's going to install a boatload of packages, and then you will have access to just Java C, which is just the Java compiler. Okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to cd into downloads. and we'll do an ls, and we can see we have that shell.java there. Now, if you follow the instructions on Stack Overflow, or if you just look up, like I said, how to make a Java file into a jar file, there's basically 2 steps that you have to do. The first one is you have to build it, and then you have to, like for lack of my technical explanation, you have to convert it from a Java program into a jar file. Okay, so the way that you build it, which is the first step, is Java C tac D, and then you want to build, and then you want to do it on anything in the directory that's .java. Okay, so we're going to hit enter, and then we're going to do an ls, and you can see now we have a build directory in there. So we want to go into cd build, and we want to do an ls, and you can see we have shell.class. So now that we have a class file, we can convert that class file into a jar file. Okay, and the one thing that you want to always keep in mind is the file needs to be named the same as the class. So if I would have tried to call this reverse shell.java, it would have thrown an error. That's why you have to be careful. You have to make sure the class and the name of the file match. Okay, so we'll minimize this, and now that we're in the build directory, to create the jar file, we do jar cvf and the name of the jar file. So shell.jar, and then you have to put in an asterisk. Okay, so we're going to hit enter, and now when we do an ls, you can see we have a jar file. Here's where it gets a little tricky, and this is where I spent some time here. We have to go to Flink. We want to submit a new job, and when we add the new job, we want to go to our downloads directory, build directory, and we want to grab the jar file, and we want to click open. So now we have the jar file there. Now, if you remember, the jar file, reverse shell jar file, is going to use port 80. So we want to start a netcat listener on port 80. So if we go back to Flink, here's where I was stuck for a little bit, because I didn't realize if you click on it, then these other arguments pop up, and you 100% you need the entry class. The entry class is shell, right? Because that's what the class file was called, shell.class. That's what the main in the Java program was, shell. That's the class, okay? So we put shell in here to let it know where the entry class is for this file, okay? And then we click submit. All right, now we get a server response, and hopefully we have a reverse shell, and we do. So now what we want to do is we want to use Python to get our job control in our shell. We're going to paste that, and we're going to hit enter, and we are David at Flink. Okay, so now what we need to do is normal enumeration. Okay, so we're going to type history, and it's just ours, and then we're going to type sudo tac L. And we've kind of hit pay dirt. So David can run sudo no password on Flink, which is the executable to start the to manipulate the Flink server, the Apache Flink server. Okay, so we're going to do an ls real quick, and we're going to go to the home directory, and I'm pretty sure there's a flag in there for us to grab. All right, so we're going to cat local.txt, and that'll give us the user flag. So now that we know we can run this Flink, my thought was to run another Java file that created another reverse shell using this sudo no password Flink. The problem was I was doing it incorrectly. I couldn't figure out how to use the command line for Flink. So what I did before I did anything else, and I think you have to use the whole path for this, because I'm not 100% sure it's in the path. So we do home David Flink bin Flink, and I just did tac h. And it comes back, and there's a bunch of stuff in here. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So let's see if we can get back to the beginning. Because there's one that caught my eye. Run, right? It says you action run compiles and runs a program. Okay, so that's the one that we're going to need to focus on, is run. The next argument that we're going to need, and I found this through trial and error, is we need to also supply tac-c, which is the entry class. Again, just like we did on the website, only this time it will be from the command line. Okay, so essentially now we're talking about Flink space run as the command that we can use. Okay, and just keep that tac-c in the back of your mind. So if we hit enter and I do the same thing, paste clipboard, run tac-h, it gives us the same information. So essentially we have to focus on this run command. Okay, that's going to allow us to run another jar file, and then we have to feed it the entry class. Now, I didn't know how to format the command, to be honest. So I found another Stack Overflow discussion, and they basically tell you right here. What I was doing was I was doing run Flink and then the jar file and then feeding it the main entry class, and it was not working at all. So I was formatting the command in the wrong order. So just to give you an idea, the way I was originally running it was I was taking this jar file and I was putting it right after run. And for some reason, it just does not work when you do that. You have to format the command in this particular order, which means you feed it the entry class and then the jar file, which kind of makes sense, because if you feed it the jar file first, you wouldn't think that the order of the arguments makes a difference. That it would get the entry class from the tac-c even if it was after the jar file. But I'm telling you, I wasted probably 30 minutes. I would have got this machine done a lot quicker if I had just bit the bullet and searched for how to use Flink on the command line. Okay? So just to keep this video fairly brief, I will tell you this. I tried to create a jar file that did a reverse shell, and I had a lot of trouble. It didn't work. So what I decided to do was to try and write a jar file that would set the UID on bin bash, so that theoretically the set UID would be on bin bash and we could just run bin bash tac-p privilege mode to escalate to root. So that's essentially what I did. Now, I'm not a Java person again. So what I did was, how do I execute Linux commands in Java? And there's a bunch of programs that they give you and methods to do it, okay? One is with Process Builder, and then the other one is with Get Runtime. I essentially found some code that used Get Runtime, and I just modified that. So what I did was, and this will be in my GitHub repository, the code that I used and modified. So, if you struggle with this or whatever, I will make sure there's a link to my GitHub that has the code that worked. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to create another Java program. Okay. And I'm going to call this one chmod.java. Okay. So the whole purpose of this Java program is to set the UID on bin bash. Okay, so here's the code that I came up with, and this was just patched together from doing research on Google. So basically, this code, you can see right here, it uses that runtime, get runtime execute command to execute chmod plus s, which is the set UID on bin bash, so that we can run bin bash in privileged mode, okay, which should escalate us to root. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this, and we're going to call it chmod. Remember, it's got to be called the same thing as the main class, and my class is called chmod. So chmod.java, okay, and we'll save this in downloads. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my downloads folder, and you can see we have this chmod.java. So what I'm going to do, just to keep everything clean, because it's going to create another build directory, is I'm just going to make a chmod folder. And then I'm going to copy chmod.java into that folder. Then we're going to open a terminal here, and we're going to use the same exact commands we used previously to compile the other jar file, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use javac, and and you don't even have to change the command because it's doing it on everything.java, okay? So I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to do an ls, and you can see now we have a build folder again. So we're going to go into the build folder, we're going to do an ls, ls, and you can see we have chmod.class. Now we're going to do the same exact thing, jar cvf chmod.jar star. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so we're going to do an ls, and now we have chmod.jar. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to create a Python web server here. Python 3, and I'm going to use 22 because, again, on this machine I did have problems with ports. So I'm trying to stick to the ports that are open, okay, that we know are kind of open via our nmap scan. So I'm going to do this Python web server on 22. We're serving up files, and now our goal is to get this chmod.jar over to the machine with Apache Flink on it. So we're going to go back to our foothold here. We're going to do a pwd just to see we're in home David, so we should be able to write here. And we're going to do wget http 192.168.45.236. Don't forget the 22. And then we're going to grab chmod.jar. Okay, so if we do an ls, you can see we have chmod.jar here. Now, if we follow the instructions on that Stack Overflow page on how to run this command, this is what it should look like, okay? You have to use the full path, and don't forget sudo, because if you forget sudo, it's not going to do anything, okay? So we're going to paste clipboard, and you can see what I did was I just ran sudo home David Flink run c chmod, which is the entry class. This is critical, right? We're feeding it the entry class, which is chmod, because that's the class inside of our jar file. And then we're feeding it the jar file. So now, if we do ls ail on bin bash, you could see the set UID is now on bin bash, which means we can bin bash tac-p for privilege mode, and we now have root. So now we can cd to root, do an ls, and eventually maybe, there we go, we'll cat proof.txt. And eventually we'll get the flag. So this machine was very interesting. It was a challenge for me. Remarkably, it took me less than 2 hours, so it took me about 1 hour and 41 minutes. I was pretty proud of that. And this is a brand new machine. There are no walkthroughs, so you're welcome. So the way we took advantage of this machine was we ran an nmap scan. We saw a couple of ports were open, one of them which was 8081, and that was running Apache Flink. I did some research on Apache Flink and saw that I could feed it a jar file as a job and run the jar file. So what we did was we installed Java on the machine. We found a Java #3 reverse shell from RevShells online. We compiled it, we built it, and we created a jar file. I added the jar file to the Apache Flink server, and critically, you have to click on that jar file and add the entry class argument. Without that entry class argument, it will not work. Make sure the names are always consistent. Whatever the name of your class is needs to be the name of the file, and then the entry class would be the name of that class, okay? So once we did that, we clicked run, we got a reverse shell. We did normal Linux enumeration, and on step 2, sudo tac-l, we saw that David could run Flink, sudo no password. Did some research on how to format commands for the command line for Apache Flink. Saw that we could use the run argument with the tac-c feeding in the entry class and point it to a jar file and run a second jar file. Now, what I found was I struggled to get a reverse shell using that method, but I was able to create a Java program that set the UID on bin bash, and that code will be in my GitHub library, okay? So we created that jar file, we transported it over to our foothold, we ran sudo no password with Flink and fed it the command line arguments it needed with our new jar file to set the UID on bin bash. We executed it, and bin bash now had the set UID on it, so we were able to bin bash tac-p and escalate to root. Cat out the flag, and that's how we did it. So hopefully you found this video useful. Hopefully you learned something. If I used any links, they'll be in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, just want to say hi, please just leave a comment. I'll be happy to have a chat with you. I do have a Discord server. All the information is on my YouTube page. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.